Games within games is an interesting curiosity. They're the kind of thing some players can hunt down and try in the greater scope of what they're actually playing. Some cases are pretty obvious. Perhaps the most famous example was Namco, who converted some of their earlier arcade titles into playable loading screens, and then dropped a patent on it to the detriment of everyone else. Not that it was going to stop a few bold companies making their own while the patent was active. Other times, it's nowhere near as cut and dry. You either gotta go way out of your way to hunt the game down like the first version of Celeste, or it's barricaded by a very specific password and maybe more than that, like the Versus mode of Mega Man 7. Speaking of that, my video subject is actually rather similar, a one-on-one fighter hiding deep within a bigger game. But out of all the types of games it could hide in, it happens to be on a now rather obscure Japanese-exclusive visual novel of all things. Obviously, this is going to be a really quirky work, but considering I'm making this video in February, which is also the game's setting, it's not hard for me to put two and two together. But if you're willing to see something completely out of left field here, then allow me this opportunity to talk about it. Before I do so, if this video turns out to be worth your time, please consider hitting that subscribe button and sharing this video to those who you think are interested. As a one-man operation, any support is very much appreciated, and I thank you in advance if you do so. The visual novel in question is a game called First Kiss Story, sometimes known as First Kiss Monogatari. It first came out on the 24th of April 1998 for the NEC pcfx. If you don't know what the pcfx is, it's the often forgotten successor to the NEC PC Engine, known outside Japan as the TurboGrafx. However, due to a massive amount of problems, many of which can be pointed right at NEC, the console was a complete and total bust and was out of sight after just 3 years on the market. If you would like more details, I actually made a video about the console as a whole, and I'll drop a link to it in the description. Despite releasing on such a bust, the game would get ported onto the PlayStation on the 26th of November that year. Following that was an OVA that released on Valentine's Day 2000, a Dreamcast sequel that released in August 2002, and a compilation of the two games for the PS2 in July 2003. The game sets you up over the course of February, as you count down the days to your high school graduation. Just before the game starts, your dad is suddenly transferred on business, but you're allowed to stay in an acquaintance of his in the Orikura family. The group consists of Yayoi, who is the head of the house and unfortunately a widow, and her two daughters, 16-year-old Kana and soon-to-be 14-year-old Manami. Your fellow schoolmates and other characters will show themselves over time as events take place over the course of the month. So yeah, it's kind of a standard romance and slice-of-life type of visual novel we're talking about here. Even so, there are a couple quirks the game has that make it actually enjoyable, language barrier be damned. There's a couple funny scenes that take place, a few risque ones here and there, and some events that are designed to pluck at your heartstrings. The latter is especially prevalent in the ending sequences. Overall, it was a game that I actually enjoyed despite middling expectations when I was first taking it on. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and restrain myself here so I don't get too carried away about talking about the visual novel. So, what's this about a hidden fighting game, you're probably wondering? Okay, let's get down to brass tacks here. The first thing to know is that this secret fighting game is exclusive only to the original pcfx release. It does not exist on the PlayStation port nor the PS2 compilation. Assuming you don't take a date option the day prior, and there are a couple choices, you'll get a call from one of your buddies on the 8th asking if you want to go over to his house that night. Hit the top option, and then handle the day as you please. Once nightfall comes, you head over to his house, talk for a little bit, and after a little bit of time, the screen fades out, and there it is. Hunex Fighters 98. Obviously a parody of King of Fighters 98. In this position you have only two options, versus 2-player, which is actually against a weak computer since this is story-based, and the manual, which of course tells you how to play the game. When you select the manual, you'll be greeted with this message. I'll go ahead and translate this for you. Thank you very much for purchasing the pcfx software First Kiss Story. Now this may be a surprise, but this minigame is a fighting game featuring heroines of other Hunex games. It's not necessary to read this online manual before playing, but it may be of use to you later. Beyond this is the menu options, controls, and how things work in the game. The first thing I want to mention here regards the pcfx controller, which does have 6 face buttons. The closest comparison I know would be the Sega Genesis 6-button arcade controller, and I say this one specifically because both of NEC's consoles have turbo switches on their default controllers. That said, if you're familiar with it, the standard 6-button controller or even the Sega Saturn controller, it shouldn't be too hard to figure this one out. Buttons 2 and 3 are your kicks, while 4 and 5 are your punches. Button 6 is the taunt, which does exactly what you expect. Button 1 is Metamorphosis, which consumes a special meter in exchange for powering yourself up for about 10 seconds. It also has guarding moves, guard cancels, reversals, throws, the whole 9 yards. As a minigame and not the main feature, this thing is mechanically impressive. However, because it's a minigame, the character roster and their movesets is pretty limited. There's only 3 characters to choose from, all coming from previous Hunex games. Asha comes from Bluebreaker, a pcfx RPG that would also get ported onto the Sega Saturn and PlayStation. Mei comes from Private Idol, a mystery-style adventure game on the PC Engine CD, as well as getting not 1 but 3 OVAs on the pcfx's Anime Freak series. And finally you've got Kana, who comes from... well, wait a minute. What the hell's going on here? All 3 girls have 5 special moves, 2 of them using the special meter. The only weak part about them is that when it comes to the meter using specials, the same 2 movesets are used for all 3 characters. In addition, Kana is the only one with a single kicking special move. Everything else uses punches. Despite my complaints there, all 3 girls respond well, and the game plays pretty nicely. And the icing on this surprising cake? The music, which was apparently done by the same group that did the soundtrack for Lords of Thunder. If that's not a good enough impression, I don't know what the hell is. As it is, there's not much you can do other than fight it out against the computer. If you win, you can choose to bail out prematurely or go for another round. End up taking the L on the other hand, and you're forced to take another round as you're assumed to be good at this game in story. You can play up to 5 rounds before your buddy suddenly gains the powers of SNK bosses and proceeds to completely obliterate you. Nah, I'm just kidding, he just tells you to get the hell out of his place. Regardless, this could serve as good practice because the standard computer is a bit more competent in the full version. How do you get the full version? Simple really, you just gotta finish the rest of the game. As a visual novel, getting the standard ending isn't going to take all that long, but if you're going after one of the girls, that's gonna be a little bit longer. Once you eventually get there, everything is saved and you just have to restart the pcfx. Once you do so and hit the main menu, you see a question mark at the bottom, hit that, and there's the full version. Of course, this full version lets you take on the computer, but versus 2-player actually does mean 2 players can fight it out against each other. There's also a survival mode and a score ranking system. So in its own way, this is a fantastic reward that comes at the cost of charging headlong into Moonrune territory for at least 2 hours. And with that, I think that's everything that there is to say about Hunex Fighters 98. You might be wondering what's so special about this game that I dedicated a video to it. Well, that question can be answered with 2 different answers, one regarding Hunex Fighters 98 and the other regarding the game it hides in. First, regarding Hunex Fighters. Now yes, there were and are better options when it comes to fighting games. However, I should also note that when it comes to those games, that was their dedication. Hunex Fighters was a side project. A special side project in that it's actually the only traditional one-on-one arcade fighter the pcfx had. While the console did have a few options in the overall genre, those options are handled in a way most don't expect. The other answer is in regards to First Kiss Story. If one does the bare minimum of research into the pcfx, First Kiss Story is much more notable for another reason. This was the console's final game, coming out 2 months after the system ended production. Assuming this game was still in the works at the time hardware production was halted, one could think that Hunex Fighters was developed and crammed into the game as a nice little parting gift for those that supported the system. With Hunex Fighters in there, this allowed the pcfx to have a much better send-off, especially considering most other consoles, either their final games tended to be rather forgettable, or for more modern systems, struck down by the plague known as Electronic Arts. Despite adding extra content onto the PlayStation port, enough that it required a second disc in fact, Hunex Fighters was nowhere to be seen on it. While First Kiss Story would have something going on in its own right, Hunex Fighters could be assumed that it was a one-time thing on a far more niche console. However, somehow, it too managed to have a life of its own. Over the course of late 1998 and into 99, a lot of stuff dedicated to First Kiss Story would get released, namely in the form of art books, an official soundtrack, and 3 desktop collection accessory CDs. Of those CDs, the third one, released in late 99, is the most important, as encoded within a disc contains Hunex Fighters 98 version 2. The core new additions here are the addition of Team Battle and a more properly designed survival mode. In addition, all the characters have some extra frames of animation, including cut-in animations when using moves that use a special meter. Outside a few balancing tweaks, however, it's still the same 3 girls fighting it out against each other, to the exact same music. To put it bluntly, you're not missing all that much here. Version 2? More like 1.2. Yet somehow, that managed to not be the end of the Hunex Fighters. The earliest point I found dates this to around 2008, but much more accurately around 2016, all 3 girls and their stages would be ripped out of the game to participate in the single greatest free-for-all the fighting game community knows. Does it need an introduction? Nah, I don't really think so. If anything, it goes to show that even within a niche among niches, those guys will find anything and everything to make it work on that thing. And that's pretty much it. A pretty decent fighting game hiding deep within the folds of a Japanese exclusive romance visual novel. And even the visual novel's pretty decent too. Though that might not be as big a surprise considering Hunex, the game's developers, were and today still are deeply entrenched in making visual novels. Of course, it might be a bit intimidating to get into considering this is Japanese text we're talking about. However, considering the position it's in, I'd say the chances of it getting translated are greater than 0, at least for the pcfx version. I say this considering 3 things. First off, the pcfx's library isn't all that big to begin with. Second, one of its games just got a fan translation completed in time for its 30th anniversary, and another one's currently in the works. The third is because that version has some interest in, Hunex Fighters existing. The same can't be said for its later ports, as the consoles they're on have other, more interesting Japanese exclusives waiting to get translated. Case in point, while I was actually getting material to make this video, a PS1 translation got published for The Adventure of Little Ralph, a highly prized Japanese exclusive on the system. Despite that, I do think First Kiss Story's time to shine will come eventually. After all, when it comes to the PCFX, the amount of games that gather any interest whatsoever are in the single digits, if not countable with one hand. When will First Kiss Story's moment in the spotlight come to be? Time will tell on that front. Before I close this video out with my ending monologue, I want to give a quick shout out and thanks to Oculin of One Controller Port and the PCFX fan club for his help regarding Hunex Fighters version 2. Without that, I felt like this video wouldn't have been complete otherwise. The links to his channels will be in the description below. Thanks, dude! Hey everybody, Eclipse14 here, thanks for watching. I was hoping to have this video ready by Valentine's Day, but I ended up in a really bad slump that pushed me back. Regardless, hopefully you enjoyed this video, even if the subject was a massive obscurity. It was just something I played and just wanted to talk about it after I really liked it. If you did like what you saw, feel free to drop a like, and if you think my work is worth your time, please hit that subscribe button, it would be very much appreciated. But in the meantime, I want to thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you next time.